Hello everyone, welcome to Sinister Prime. Since many of you listen to these stories to relax and drift off into dreams, I thought it would be wonderful to hear where you're tuning in from around the world. Let's begin the story. I've been working night shifts at Brighton Memorial Hospital for the last 6 months. It's the kind of job that kills you slowly, sucking away your energy and stealing your days. But the pay's decent, and I don't mind the quiet. I'm a janitor, cleaning up the messes that everyone else is too important to notice. But the things I've seen in this hospital, things that no one talks about. I've seen patients die, families break down in the hallways, and doctors trying desperately to keep up the facade of control. It's a haunted place, in more ways than one. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last Halloween. It was a quiet night, dead quiet, except for the occasional faint beep of a heart monitor down the hall or the distant echo of heels clicking against the tiles. I liked the peace. The other janitors usually bailed out by midnight, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, though, the hospital felt off. The fluorescent lights above flickered more than usual, casting strange shadows that made the corridors seem longer, deeper. There was this tension in the air, like a storm was brewing. Even the patients were unusually still. Then, around 1 a.m., the emergency power suddenly kicked in. The lights dimmed to a sickly yellow, and all the monitors went dead. Not the first time that's happened, I thought. I made my way to the maintenance closet to grab my flashlight, cursing the shitty electrical system. But when I opened the door, something was wrong. The closet wasn't the small, cramped space I was used to. It had changed. It stretched back further than it should have, the walls narrowing into a point of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat. The air smelled damp, like old rot and mold, and the walls weren't walls anymore. They were moving. The surface was slick, shiny, pulsating like flesh. And then I heard it, a sound like wet, sucking footsteps coming from the darkness. Slow, deliberate. I backed out, slamming the door shut. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the doorknob. What the hell was that? I tried to laugh it off. Just the sleep deprivation playing tricks on me. I hadn't slept properly in days. But deep down, I knew it was real. I forced myself to keep moving. I grabbed my mop, telling myself to just get through the shift. It would be over soon. But then I saw her. A woman standing at the end of the hall, dressed in a hospital gown. She was pale, her skin a sickly shade of gray under the dim lights. Her hair was matted, sticking to her gaunt face in clumps. At first I thought she was just another patient wandering where she shouldn't be. "Miss, you shouldn't be out here," I called, my voice sounding hollow in the empty corridor. She didn't respond, just stood there, staring at me, her eyes wide and glassy, her mouth hanging open. A long, dark line of something wet trickled down her chin, dripping onto the floor. "Miss." I took a step toward her, my heart pounding now. Something was wrong. That's when she moved. Her body twisted in a way that was all wrong, unnatural, like her bones were bending in directions they weren't supposed to. Her head snapped to the side with a sickening crunch, her limbs contorting as she began to crawl toward me, not walking, crawling, her fingers scraping along the floor like claws. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up in terror. She was getting closer, her mouth opening wider than any human mouth should. Her teeth were jagged, broken, black. I could see her eyes clearly now. No pupils, just white, like she was dead. The stench hit me next, an overwhelming reek of decay and blood. I turned and bolted, racing down the hall, my shoes squeaking against the polished tiles. Behind me, I could hear the sound of her nails scraping the floor. Faster, closer. I darted into the nearest room and slammed the door shut, my back pressed against it. Panting. Room 616. I'd cleaned it earlier that night. The bed was empty, freshly made. Or it should have been. But now there was someone, something, lying in it. At first it looked like a patient, but the more I stared, the more I realized it wasn't human. Its skin was stretched tight, too tight, over a skeletal frame. The thing's eyes were sunken deep into its skull, but they were open, staring straight at me. Its mouth was sewn shut with thick black thread, the stitches crisscrossing its lips, twisting up into a hideous grin. I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor as the figure in the bed slowly sat up, the sound of bones cracking filling the room. It cocked its head to one side as though studying me. And then it smiled. Despite the stitches, it smiled. My vision blurred with panic. I turned to run, but the door wouldn't open. I yanked at the handle, pulling desperately, but it was stuck. My pulse thundered in my ears as I heard the figure behind me stand, its bare feet padding softly across the tile floor, getting closer. Please, no. No. I whimpered, banging on the door. Suddenly the door flew open, and I stumbled out, falling to the floor in a heap. When I looked up, the hallway was empty. The lights had returned to normal. No flicker, no dim yellow hue, but the smell of decay still clung to the air, thick and suffocating. I should have left right then and there. I should have run for my life. But something in the back of my mind kept pulling me back, kept whispering that I wasn't done, that I had to finish the shift. I forced myself to stand, to keep moving, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. As I walked through the hallways, I noticed things were changing. The walls seemed to bend and warp, the corners of the rooms stretching unnaturally, like they were being pulled by some unseen force. The ceiling seemed to rise, then sink, breathing in and out like the whole building was alive. I passed by the nurse's station and froze. There was a woman sitting there, her back to me. Her head was slumped forward like she'd fallen asleep at her desk. But something about her wasn't right. The skin on her arms looked wrong, too smooth, almost like plastic. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my throat. "Excuse me, ma'am." The woman didn't move. I reached out a trembling hand and touched her shoulder. As soon as my fingers made contact, her head snapped up, her face twisted in a grotesque frozen scream. Her eyes were gone, just empty black sockets staring straight through me, and her mouth was stitched shut. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. But she didn't move. Her body stayed slumped over, frozen in that horrifying pose, like a macabre mannequin. Then, the intercom crackled to life. "Janitor to the basement. Immediately. Janitor to the basement." My blood turned to ice. I'd never been called to the basement before. Hell, I didn't even know anyone worked down there after dark. But the voice, it wasn't the usual calm, robotic announcement. It was distorted, wet, like someone was whispering through a mouthful of blood. I didn't want to go. Every part of me wanted to run, to get the hell out of there. But the pull, something was pulling me toward the basement. I couldn't resist it. The stairwell leading down was colder than the rest of the hospital, the kind of cold that gnaws at your bones, making your breath come out in misty puffs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. When I reached the basement door, it was already ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my flashlight beam trembling as I stepped inside. The basement was wrong. The walls were covered in something. It looked like human skin, stretched taut over the concrete, veins and sinew visible beneath the surface. The smell of rot was overwhelming, nearly knocking me to my knees. In the center of the room was an operating table, and lying on it was a body, covered with a sheet. I knew I shouldn't have gone closer. I knew, but something pulled me in. I gripped the edge of the sheet with trembling fingers and pulled it back. The body on the table was me. My own lifeless face stared back at me, pale and waxy, my mouth sewn shut, my eyes open wide in a frozen scream. My heart stopped. I stumbled back, my vision swimming, bile rising in my throat. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut behind me, the echo bouncing off the fleshy walls, sealing me in. The air felt heavier, the stench of decay almost unbearable now. My head spun as I tried to process the impossibility lying before me, my own corpse stretched out on the table. A deep, guttural sound filled the room, like something massive shifting in the shadows. I whipped around, my flashlight flickering, as the beam skittered across the basement surfaces, walls that seemed to move and breathe, the floor slick with something dark and wet. My breath hitched in my throat as I scanned the room, but I couldn't see where the sound was coming from. Then, the body on the table moved. I screamed. It was an involuntary, primal sound that tore through my chest. My corpse's head slowly turned toward me, its stitched-up mouth twitching as though trying to form words. And then, with a sickening tear, the stitches across my corpse's mouth ripped apart, the black thread snapping like wet sinew. A rasping voice filled the room, distorted and hollow, but unmistakably mine. "You're too late," it whispered, the sound thick with phlegm and death. "It's already here." I backed away, heart pounding, legs weak, but my doppelganger kept watching me, its lifeless eyes following every desperate step I took. Suddenly the flashlight flickered again and died, plunging the room into total darkness. The silence was suffocating. Then came the sound again, wet footsteps, slow and deliberate, drawing closer from somewhere deep within the shadows. I couldn't breathe. My entire body was shaking, paralyzed by terror. I tried to reach for the door, but something stopped me. A hand. Cold, bony fingers wrapped around my wrist, tighter and tighter, until I thought the bones might snap. I tried to yank away, but it was impossible. The grip was iron. Then the voice came again, this time right by my ear, soft but dripping with malice. "Don't fight it." My skin crawled, my mind racing with a primal, overwhelming urge to get out, to survive. But the cold hand held me fast. And in that endless darkness I felt something else, something watching. Eyes, hundreds of them, boring into me from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I could feel them tracking my every breath, every twitch of my body. Then, slowly, I began to hear them. Voices, whispering, hundreds of them, merging into a cacophony of maddening sound, impossible to ignore. They filled my head, growing louder, more insistent, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. But one word stood out, over and over again. Stay. I felt the pull again, that same inescapable force that had drawn me to the basement. But now, it was more than a pull. It was a compulsion. My feet, almost against my will, started moving, shuffling toward the table where my own body lay. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but my legs wouldn't listen. I was being pulled, dragged toward the thing on the table, toward the darkness that swirled and grew around it. The whispers turned into screams. My head pounded with the noise, my vision blurring as the world around me twisted and warped. The air grew thick with the smell of rot and blood, and I could feel something shifting beneath the floor, something alive, hungry. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, stood in the far corner of the room, barely visible in the dark. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its skin stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. Its face, if you could call it that, was a blank, featureless void, except for the eyes. Rows and rows of eyes, all staring at me, unblinking, filled with an unspeakable hunger. The thing stepped forward, its movement unnatural, jerky, like a marionette on broken strings. It dragged its limbs across the floor, its body contorting in impossible ways, and with each step, the temperature plummeted further. My breath came out in short, ragged gasps, the cold seeping into my bones. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat was too dry, my mind too numb with fear. The thing was coming closer, closer, and I couldn't move, couldn't fight it. My legs had given up on me. The pull was too strong. Then, without warning, the thing lunged. Its hand shot out, cold as death, and grabbed my face. Sharp, spindly fingers dug into my skin, and I felt something crawl into me, something dark and writhing. I could feel it slithering beneath my flesh, burrowing into my bones, into my mind. The world around me shattered. I don't remember how long I was out. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. All I know is that when I opened my eyes, I was back in the hallway. But the hospital was different now. The lights were still dim, flickering weakly, but everything else, the walls, the floors, the ceilings, they were all wrong. Warped, twisted. The once clean white tiles were now stained with something dark and viscous, and the walls were breathing, like the hospital itself had become a living organism, pulsing, shifting. I stood there, shaking, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. And then I realized I was holding something, a key, rusted old, slick with blood. I stared at it, confusion and terror warring in my mind. I had no idea where it had come from or why I had it, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever that key opened, I didn't want to find out. I turned to leave, to get out of that hellhole once and for all. But when I reached the main exit, the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, no matter how much I yanked at the handle, it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. And then behind me, I heard it again. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, closer. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. But there was nothing, just an empty hallway, stretching into infinity. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the walls, but I couldn't see anyone, anything. And then it hit me. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Them. Whatever had been in the basement, whatever had pulled me into this nightmare, it was here, with me now, all around me. I could feel their eyes on me, could hear their whispering voices, could sense their hunger. And I knew I was never getting out of here. It's been days, weeks. Time doesn't work right anymore. I'm still in the hospital, still wandering its endless, twisting halls, trying to find a way out. But there isn't one. There never was. The hospital wants me here. It's alive, and it's feeding on me. My thoughts, my memories, they're slipping away. The whispers are louder now, constant, filling my head until I can't think, can't breathe. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I found an old phone, though. I'm writing this down in case anyone ever finds it, in case anyone else comes here thinking they're just working another night shift. Don't come here. And whatever you do, don't take the key. The hospital is playing tricks on me. I can feel it. It's alive in ways I can't explain. Each breath I take feels like it's breathing with me, matching my rhythm, mimicking the beat of my heart. Sometimes I hear my name echoing through the walls, my own voice calling out from rooms that don't exist, from behind doors that lead nowhere. I tried going back to the basement, hoping to retrace my steps, to maybe find some way of undoing this nightmare, but the door wasn't there anymore. Instead, I found a hallway that shouldn't have been there. Long, stretching into the distance like a grotesque tunnel, lit by flickering red lights. At the end of the hall, there was a door, just slightly ajar, with someone, standing in its shadow. It was me. Or at least it looked like me. It just stood there, staring with hollow eyes, beckoning me closer. I didn't go. I should have. Maybe that's what it wanted. Maybe that's what this place needs, for me to just give in. But I can't. Not yet. I'm holding on to something, some fragment of who I was before I stepped into this God-forsaken place. But I'm slipping. The whispers, they're louder now, more distinct. Sometimes I think I understand what they're saying, but then it slips away before I can fully grasp it, like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. I'm hungry. So hungry. I haven't eaten in what feels like weeks, but I'm not dying. I can't. The hospital won't let me. It's keeping me alive, feeding on my fear, my confusion, my sanity. Every time I feel like I'm on the edge, ready to let go, ready to accept whatever this place has in store for me, it drags me back, just enough to keep me alive, to keep me here. I woke up today on one of the gurneys. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember lying down. But there I was, strapped in, unable to move, staring up at the ceiling as it pulsed and shifted, like a living organism. It felt like I was in the belly of some giant beast, swallowed whole and forgotten. And then I saw them, the figures. They stood in a circle around me, faces obscured by darkness, their limbs long and twisted, like grotesque shadows. They didn't speak, didn't move. They just watched me, their eyes gleaming in the dim light, reflecting something primal and wrong. One of them leaned closer, and I could see its face, or rather the lack of one. Just a void where a mouth should have been, where eyes should have been. But I could feel it smiling. I could feel its hunger. It raised something above my chest, an object, sharp and gleaming in the faint light. A scalpel? No, something older, something worse. I struggled, screamed, thrashed against the restraints, but they wouldn't budge. I was trapped, helpless, at the mercy of these things, these creatures that had once been human, but were now something else entirely. Something hollow, something made of darkness. The scalpel, or whatever it was, sank into my chest. The pain was blinding, searing, but I couldn't move, couldn't escape. It wasn't cutting flesh, it was cutting something deeper. Something beneath my skin, beneath my soul. I felt something leave me, a piece of me, something vital, something that kept me tethered to reality. It slipped away, and I was left hollow, empty, a shell of who I had been. When I woke up again, I was back in the hallway, the gurney gone, the figures gone. But I could still feel the pain in my chest, the void where something had been taken from me. I don't know how long I've been here now. The hospital has become a maze, an endless, shifting labyrinth of rooms and hallways that lead nowhere. I don't even know if the hospital is real anymore. Sometimes I think I've always been here, that this place is some kind of purgatory, some eternal punishment for sins I don't even remember committing. But other times I think it's worse than that. I think I brought this place to life, that it exists because of me, because of the fear, the darkness inside me. It's feeding off me, growing stronger every day, twisting and warping reality, until there's nothing left but the hospital and the things that inhabit it. I see them more often now. The shadows. They crawl along the walls, skittering just out of sight, whispering to me, beckoning me deeper into the dark. Sometimes they take the shape of people I knew, old co-workers, my mother, even Lily. They smile at me, their faces contorted and wrong, their eyes too wide, too hungry. They want me to join them. I don't know how much longer I can resist. I tried to leave again today. I made it all the way to the main entrance. The door was there this time, standing wide open, beckoning me toward freedom. I could see the outside world, the streetlights, the dark sky, the cars passing by. For a moment I thought I could make it, But as soon as I stepped toward the door, I felt it. The hospital pulled me back. It didn't let me go. It never will. I can't fight it anymore. The darkness is inside me now. It's in my blood, in my bones. I can feel it crawling under my skin, whispering to me, telling me to give in, to let go. I'm so tired, so fucking tired. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I was ever real. Maybe I've always been a part of this place. Maybe I've always belonged here. Maybe I should use the key. Maybe that's the only way out. This will be my last entry. I'm going to the basement again. The door appeared tonight, right where it was the first time. I know what's waiting for me down there. The thing. Me. I'm not afraid anymore. I understand now. The hospital isn't just alive. It's me. I brought it here. I made it real. All of this, all the horror, all the pain, it's because of me. And the key. It's the final piece. I'm going to open the door. I have to. But it's already too late for that. The hospital owns me now, and it always will. The night shift never ends.